All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're looking at the fascinating journey of how a simple melody can just instantly transport us back in time. You know that feeling, right? You're driving, maybe wandering down the grocery store aisle, and a song comes on that you literally haven't heard in decades. Suddenly, you aren't just remembering the past, you're absolutely feeling it. So, we're going to break down the exact science of why this happens. And trust me, the mechanics inside your head, they're just as beautiful as the music itself. Take this quote, for example. It perfectly captures that experience of hearing a 90s Eurodance track like Snap's Rhythm as a Dancer and how it acts like a total involuntary time machine. It unlocks these incredibly vivid, emotionally powerful moments. I mean, if you try to consciously remember some random Tuesday from a vacation 20 years ago, you probably couldn't do it. But the second that bass line drops, boom, you remember the sand, the smell of the ocean, exactly how you felt. But how exactly does a simple wave of sound trigger such a massive reflex in our brains? Journey into the brain, the physical path of a sound wave. To understand the magic here, we first have to map out the physical journey of a sound wave. It happens fast. First, primeval acoustic cues enter your ear. From there, they travel straight into the auditory cortex and temporal lobe to be parsed out. Next, your brain does a quick salience and valence check. Basically, it's asking itself, okay, does this matter to me, and is this a positive or negative sound? Finally, this triggers your autonomic nervous system. And honestly, that last step is exactly why an intense movie soundtrack, think the theme from Jaws, literally makes your heart beat faster and changes your breathing. Now, this early processing, it acts like an ancient evolutionary defense mechanism. Our earliest mammalian ancestors were nocturnal, so they had to rely heavily on hearing just to survive. So when you're sitting in a concert hall, your temporal lobe is forced to sift through a wildly complex soundscape. It's picking apart the ambient noise in a way that's deeply tied to how our ancestors listened for, say, the crescendo of approaching predators. We are literally hardwired to pay deep, focused attention to complex acoustic patterns. Memory and emotion networks. How music lights up the mind. So as the sound travels further inward, it leaves the auditory processing centers and hits the hippocampus. This is a massive structure that takes in an absolute ton of information every single minute. But getting that information back out later isn't always a walk in the park. The hippocampus doesn't just hand over an autobiographical memory just because you consciously ask for it. However, it responds powerfully to rhythm, rhyme, and melody. These musical elements act like a master key. They provide the structural cues needed to unlock your stored personal history. Actually, that's exactly why we learned our ABCs to a melody in the first place. Working right alongside the hippocampus is the amygdala, which is basically your brain's emotional core. Because these two structures fire together when you listen to music, the amygdala makes sure that the moments retrieved by the hippocampus are completely saturated with intense emotional weight. You're not just remembering the lyrics, right? You're remembering the joy, the heartbreak, or the sheer excitement you felt when you first heard them. And there's a really surprising biological quirk happening here, too. The orbital frontal cortex, or OFC, which sits just above your eye sockets, gets involved. When we listen to Western tonal music, the composer is constantly playing with tension and resolution, building up our anticipation and then finally releasing it. Well, tracking this actually triggers a hyperactive neural loop in the OFC. Fascinatingly, this is the exact same neuronal loop that runs on overdrive in clinical conditions like obsessive-compulsive disorder, where the brain is excessively anticipating environmental cues. Music is essentially hacking our brain's anticipation networks. Because music lights up the motor system, the emotion centers, the anticipation networks, and the memory banks all at the exact same time, it gets encoded as an incredibly rich experience. Songs become what researchers actually call auditory post-it notes. They physically and permanently attach themselves to specific people, specific places, and distinct periods of our lives. The power of implicit memory, remembering without trying. We often find that music evokes memories even when we aren't actively trying to remember a single thing. You don't consciously decide to time travel when a song comes on the radio. It just kind of happens. And that highlights a stark contrast between our two main types of memory. Explicit memory is when you deliberately try to recall facts, like where did I go on vacation back in 1998? That takes effort, and sadly, it's highly vulnerable to neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's. Implicit memory, on the other hand, operates totally outside of our consciousness. It's reactive, it's highly durable, and it is deeply emotional. Music binds itself to these robust implicit systems, which is exactly why musical recall feels like a sudden, effortless reflex. The reminiscence bump, the soundtrack of our youth. This brings us to a really cool concept called the reminiscence bump. That robust implicit system we just talked about perfectly explains why the music we hear repeatedly during our teens and 20s just sticks with us forever. Why then? Well, because this is a period of intense firsts. First loves, first heartbreak, leaving home, gaining your independence. Plus, music during this time is super social. We're sharing it at parties, blasting it in cars with friends, going to concerts. Pop music from this exciting era forms a permanent soundtrack simply because it accidentally attaches itself to our most meaningful, formative experiences. Emotional boundaries, putting memories in boxes. So, as we gather decades of this musical soundtrack, how does our brain actually organize the whole shebang? We need a way to file this away so it isn't just a chaotic blur of sound and feeling. To understand how we do this, we can look at some incredible recent research out of UCLA. They discovered that fluctuating emotions in music literally act like storage boxes for our memories in real time. When music shifts towards positive emotions, it integrates memories, making the events feel closer together in time. But when the music shifts toward negative or sad emotions, it actually separates those memories, expanding the mental distance between them. Composers and artists actively use these emotional shifts to weave a story and organize our minds. Think about the intense suspense and drastic emotional shifts in a song like Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody, or even the distinct chapter-like structure of Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. By creating these emotional boundaries, music imbues our memories with a rich temporal structure. It neatly packs our life experiences into mental boxes, allowing us to easily open and close specific memories much later in life. A soundtrack to our lives, the therapeutic power of music. Understanding this complex neuroscience is absolutely crucial because it has profound, real-world applications. Because music taps into that highly durable implicit memory, it's become a vital tool for therapy. It can unlock forgotten autobiographical memories for dementia patients whose explicit memory is failing them. For people dealing with depression, it helps them recall more well-rounded, complex life experiences rather than just focusing on the negative stuff. For PTSD patients, the positive emotional shifts in music can actually help them safely box up and reintegrate traumatic memories so they don't unexpectedly spill over into daily life. Studies even show that listening to certain Mozart sonatas can reduce seizure frequency in some epilepsy patients. It's a real game changer. Because music demands our brain's immediate attention and unfolds in real time, it's also an incredible tool for neuroplasticity. It can even indirectly help stroke victims who suffer from sensory amusia, which is the loss of the ability to perceive music. The very act of engaging with music forces neurons to fire in entirely new combinations, forging brand new neural communication pathways to bypass damaged tissue. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to pause and reevaluate what a song actually is. We've seen how it navigates ancient survival pathways, loops through our deepest emotional centers, and literally boxes up the chapters of our lives. It forces us to ask a pretty heavy question. Just how deeply is our own personal identity, our emotional health, and the very story of our lives fundamentally constructed by the songs we've absorbed? Next time you hear an old favorite on the radio, remember, you aren't just listening to music. You're listening to yourself.